First Things, episode number 55.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So good to have you back with me today as we are continuing our study on essentialism. And this week we are talking about the third pillar, the third mindset or paradigm that you need to be thinking in your life in order to embrace essentialism to its fullest. We've already talked about two of these pillars in past weeks. We first talked about the pillar of choice, where the non-essentialist is going to say, I have to. And that's their mantra in life. This is what they think about a lot. I have to. I have no choice. I must do this. They forfeit the right to choose, where an essentialist has to come at life from a paradigm of I choose to. We exercise the power of choice. I'm choosing to do this, not I have to do this. In that episode, we talked about Neil Fiore's book, The Now Habit, which we've done a whole series on in this podcast. And I was thinking about that this last week. My daughter just started 8th grade this year. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the U.S. school system, that is considered the last grade in middle school. So that means that next year she will be first year in high school. And I'll be honest with you, I just really had a hard time with this. It reminded me of the analogy we were talking about with Neil Fiore when he was jumping out of the plane, and he would see people. They were going out of that plane. They thought that they could somehow convince the sergeant to make an exception for them. I've changed my mind. And what would happen is the sergeant would literally kick them out of the plane. They would be at the door with their hands gripped and saying, no, I'm not going to go. And the sergeant would come and kick them in the chest and knock the wind out of them, and out they went. And he said, I decided then that I was not going to exit the plane that way. I was going to choose to leave this plane. I actually had a choice in that. And there's many things in life that we feel like we have no choice about, such as my daughter growing old, getting older, going into higher grades. And it just seems like yesterday for me that she was in the second grade, the third grade, just this little bitty girl running around playing with dolls and grabbing my iPad when I wasn't looking type of thing. And here she is in 8th grade and just a few inches shorter than me. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't like this because I have no control over this situation. And it really bothered me for a variety of reasons. One being that she's just getting older. And this time of life that, that I've maybe taken for granted in some ways, that time is closing up on me. And a new period, a new chapter is opening up, but we can become so fixated on the current chapter. And I never want the current chapter to end. And the fact is we don't really have control over those types of things. Plus also with recent events such as the death of Robin Williams and things like that, it once again makes you face your own mortality and think, I'm not going to be young forever. There's going to be a day I get older. There's going to be a day I get very old. There comes a day when I'm not going to be here anymore and I'm going to die. So what am I doing with my life? And it circles back around to all those big questions that we're really facing in this whole series about essentialism. What really, really matters in life? And as I was thinking about this, it came back to me in full force that there's a difference between choice and control. See, the thing that I was struggling with my daughter is that I didn't have any control over that situation. I couldn't just keep her young. I couldn't make time go slower or anything like that. I had no control over that. And it felt very much like I was one of these infantry people standing at the doorway of the plane with Neil Fiore saying, I don't want to jump. I don't want to jump. And because I was obsessed with control, because I was obsessed with not wanting the current chapter to end and the new chapter to begin, I could dig my heels, dig my knuckles into the door, and in so doing, I've lost my choice in the matter. Because time is going to keep moving forward. I have no control over that. I can't freeze time. And if I'm going to attempt to control that, I end up losing any choice that I had in that matter. It's a either or in some sense. I cannot control things, and my attempt to get depressed because of it, to be down because of it, to say I don't want things to change, I end up losing the choice in the now moment. There's an element in which we can be in the now moment. But that is a choice that we must make. It's a strange thing that in our lives, we have to choose to live in the now moment. You would think that it would just be automatic. We can go through our lives, and yes, we're living in the now moment, but are we really living in the now moment? I find that many of us exist in the now moment, but it takes a conscious choice to say, I'm going to embrace the now moment. It doesn't happen automatically, and it doesn't happen just because you live and breathe and go through your day. Because as I was doing, I could be living in the past or in the future, not in the now moment, even though I'm doing things in the now moment. I haven't really embraced the now moment. And if I don't embrace the now moment, I will essentially lose my ability to choose. I'm not saying to lose my ability to choose forever. I'm saying that I can let days and weeks and months go by where I am not living in today. So I can become obsessed with the future, for instance. So in my mind, the last few weeks, my daughter's been in high school. In fact, she's already graduated college and got married and moved off over into Europe or someplace. That's what's going on in my mind, but that's not reality. The reality is she's still in middle school. She's still in the 8th grade, and I can choose to embrace that now moment and enjoy her now because that's where she's at right now. Or I can choose to live in some hypothetical future and be depressed that she's gotten older and she's moved away and stuff that hasn't happened yet. And yes, it will happen one day. That's just the nature of time, and that's something beyond our control. So I don't know if that helps any, again, to talk about choice, but it really hit home with me this last week, and I just wanted to share that with you for a few minutes because I really ran face to face with this issue of choice and essentialism again. The fact that I must choose the now moment, and I cannot deny my ability to choose. I cannot deny the dignity of choice. And that also means, and this is a scary thought, that if I don't choose, there's no one to blame but myself. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow, but it's something we really need to think about. If you go 10 years of your life without doing things that are really passionate for you, things that resonate with you, putting your family first, putting life first, you really don't have anyone to blame but yourself. You can say, oh, but I had to pay the bills and I had a job to do, but that was your choice. That was your choice to do those things. And guess what? If you're listening to me today, it's not too late to make new choices. I don't care what your track record has been. I don't care how much you may have neglected certain things. And you say, well, but Brandon, I've spent 30 years of my life dedicated to my job and now my kids are away. It's still not too late. It just takes a choice. It just takes some effort to move toward your true north. And yes, as Stephen Covey says, isn't it horrible to climb that ladder of success rung by rung to get up to the top and realize that it has been leaning on the whole wrong wall the entire time? Yes, that is terrible. But I will say that better to know it at least. It would have been much better to have known it from the beginning because think of all the time that wouldn't have been wasted. But if you see it when you get up to the top, at least you've seen it. The most horrible condition I can think of to be in life is that you never see it. So if you're at the top of the ladder and you realize it's leaning on the wrong wall, well, just get back down. Just walk back down that ladder, pick it up, and move it to the right wall and start all over again. It's never too late. It's always a choice. The second pillar we talked about last week was that only a few things really matter in life. The non-essentialist thinks that everything is essential or almost everything is essential. Everything is an opportunity and they're all equal opportunities and therefore we need to just do everything. But an essentialist, what he thinks or what she thinks is that almost everything is non-essential. There are the vital few and there are the trivial many. And our role, our job, our task is to identify what are those vital few things. And as we said last week, usually the most important things, the vital few things, are not going to scream for your attention, and they will gladly be ignored many, many times. Or if they are vocal about being ignored, they will silence after a certain period of your neglect. So that could be relationships with someone. They may complain for a while, you're not spending time with me, you're not doing things with me, you're not listening to me, and eventually they'll quit telling you those things. Same things with children, same things with other relationships, things that are your hobbies, things that are your passions. They will sit silent, dormant for years and never bother you. Every now and then, you may have that toothache of the soul by where it comes back and you're like, I really love doing that. I need to get back doing that. And they'll pop up and they'll be like, wow, maybe he's about to pay attention to us. And then you go on with your life and neglect them and they keep on being silent. Those are the important things. That's the thing that we should be most concerned about is the fact that our most important things, those vital few things, don't scream at us always. They don't clamor for our attention always. It's the trivial things that clamor for our attention, that scream at us. That's the noise that we have inside of us all of the time. I was thinking about this a few days ago. I'm going to play you some noise right now and keep talking. So right now you're starting to hear some noise, and it's probably aggravating, and I'm not going to keep doing this. But as I turn up the noise, notice how it gets harder and harder to hear what I'm saying. So at this point, you may be barely able to even hear what I'm saying because of all the noise. So now I'm going to start backing away the noise, and you're probably starting to hear me a lot better and a lot better and a lot better. And now the noise is completely gone. You see, noise, we've got to find a way to filter this out in our lives. And if we go on autopilot, noise will dominate our lives. And we're not going to be able to hear things. And it's going to take us a lot more energy to really hear the more essential things if we don't have a way to silence the noise in our lives. And some of that silencing of noise could be very simple. It may be just taking a break from technology one day a week. We've had a whole episode on that, talking about taking a fast from technology. And it's interesting to me how some of my more personal episodes sometimes aren't the most popular episode. And in episode 17, so you can go to firstthingsproductivity.com/17, and you will see a podcast called My Challenge to You, Unplugging from Technology, where I basically gave a challenge to go even one day a week to get away from your technology, to turn off your phone, to turn off your Facebook, to turn off your email, and to not answer those types of things. If we're not careful, we will let that noise start taking dominance in our lives, and it will drown out. Remember the thing I played for you a while ago? Think about that in your mind. The more you have stuff like this in your life, TV, television shows, DVRs, all these types of things, I'm not saying you can't enjoy them, that they can't be in your life. I'm just saying if you don't have boundaries in your life for those things, they will have a tendency to add a tremendous amount of noise and drown out the signal of the very thing you most want to hear in your life. So now we're dealing with the last pillar today, and that is called trade-off. What problem do I really want? And the author, Greg McEwen, goes through an entire example that I found fascinating about Southwest Airlines, talking about how it is one company that has had amazing financial results year after year, although it hasn't always been great at generating profits. But the reason why they're so great at this is because of their business strategy. And their business strategy was very intentional. It was about making certain types of trade-offs. They realized quickly that they weren't going to be the airline for everyone. So if you've ever ridden on Southwest Airlines, you know certain things about them. First of all, they don't have a first class area. Everyone has the same opportunity for the seats. It's a matter of when you check in online, although now you can kind of pay to get some of those advanced seats or let them do it for you. They don't have meals on the plane. You can't buy meals on the plane. They don't go everywhere. I wish they did. I wish they would fly to Hawaii. That would be awesome. They don't fly everywhere. They're very limited in where they fly. And all of that stuff is intentional. The fact is they could try to be all things to all people, but they realized that it would violate their very principle of who they wanted to be. To be all things to everyone is to essentially to be nothing to everyone, because you're not going to be able to please everyone. You're not going to be able to do everything. I cannot do everything. I am limited in what I'm capable of doing, and that's actually a very good thing. We have to be able to look at every opportunity and say, well, in this case, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this because it doesn't contribute to the end result of what I really am trying to achieve. I could do 1,000 different things that aren't going to really contribute much to what I'm really wanting to achieve. And I've got to have the dignity. Now, this is tying in the first two pillars. I've got to have the dignity of choice to say no to things. The worst case we could ever be is when we attempt to straddle things. We attempt to try to make all this stuff work, or we attempt to incorporate someone else's vision of how things should work. Greg gave that example in the book about Continental Light being one such airline that tried to mimic Southwest, but they did it in such a way that they kept the bulk of who they were before, and they tried to add in this little element of Southwest, and they failed miserably because they were like this two-headed schizophrenic monster of an airline that didn't know who it was. There's an essence of intensity to life when we embrace simplicity. One of the things I often try to do and sometimes forget to do until my life gets rather hectic is to look at my life and think, where in my life does it seem like things are really complex? Because often it's in simplicity where life is really lived. And if I go and look at where things are getting too complex, I will intentionally try to make things simpler. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, to make things simple. In order to make things simple, you have to do a lot of trade-offs. You have to put things aside. You have to say no to certain things. You have to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I do this in all areas of my life, even down to what apps I have on my phone. I will have certain apps on my phone, and I'm thinking, this actually makes my life more complicated than it does make it easier, so I'll just simply delete it off of my phone. If I use a program on the computer that tends to make my life more difficult, I won't use it. In fact, I've told you that before in the episode about some of the tools that I use. That's a litmus test I use for a program. If I can figure out 60 to 70% of the program without a manual, without much effort, then it's usually something I will use and keep into practice. But if it's so convoluted and complicated that I can't even do the basic things without getting out a manual and reading through it, then I will usually just dismiss it and not even use it at all. There's something to be said about simplicity, but you've got to have trade-offs. As Greg McKeown says in his book, ignoring the reality of trade-offs is a terrible strategy for organizations and for people. He says, have you ever spent time with someone who is always trying to fit just one more thing in? Such people know they have 10 minutes to get to a meeting that takes 10 minutes to walk to, but they still sit down to answer a couple of emails before they go. Or they agree to put together a report by Friday, even though they have another huge deadline the same day. Or maybe they promise to swing by their cousin's birthday party on Saturday night, even though they already have tickets to a show that starts at exactly the same time. Their logic, which ignores the reality of trade-offs, is I can do both. The rather important problem is that this logic is false. Inevitably, they are late to the meeting, they miss one or both of their deadlines, or do a shoddy job on both projects, and they either don't make it to their cousin's celebration, or they miss the show, or they're late to the show. The reality is saying yes to any opportunity, by definition, requires saying no to several others. So we see here a big trap we've got to really look out for, and that is this misconception, this false thought that says, I can do all things. I can do everything. And the fact is, no, you cannot. You can't do everything. You can do anything, but not everything. And that needs to be our new mantra in life to embrace essentialism. We must replace the stinking thinking that I can do everything. I can do both. I can do it all with I can do anything, but not everything. And that means if I can do anything, but not everything, then I have to choose what I say yes to. And that means saying no to several things. Greg quotes Erin Callan, the former CFO of Lehman Brothers, who was in a piece in the New York Times, where she talked about this thing of trade-offs by default. She says, I didn't start out with the goal of devoting all of myself to my job. It crept in over time. Each year that went by, slight modifications became the new normal. First, I spent a half hour on Sunday organizing my email, to-do list, and calendar to make Monday morning easier. Then I was working a few hours on Sunday, then all day on Sunday. My boundaries slipped away until work was all that was left. Her story demonstrates a critical truth. We can either make the hard choices for ourselves or allow others, whether that be our colleagues, our boss, or our customers, to decide for us. And wow, this was a huge lesson I had to learn about 3 or 4 years ago. I was finding myself doing this very same thing. In fact, I get tempted to do that even now. I'll come around on Sunday and I'm tempted to start checking my emails, to start doing a few things ahead of time to make my Monday go a lot smoother. But guess what? I've done that before. And if you've ever done it, you know what happens. You start doing that, and then before long, half of your Sunday is devoted to that. And before long, all of your Sunday is devoted to that. Or you will spill over into Saturday, and some of your Saturday will be devoted to that. And before long, you're working 7 days a week, and you are a candidate for burnout. And you will usually burn out to a crisp or suffer through some severe depression or other types of ailments as you're trying to make something work that doesn't work. Now, if your first things are work and doing nothing but work, then I say, well, okay, I guess go for it. But I've yet to meet one person that if I really dig down deep, that's their primary motivation is nothing but work. The fact is, we're social people, and we can't get around that even if we consider ourselves introverted people. I've told you many times, I've often dealt with introversion in myself. I kind of like being alone many, many times. But even when I'm alone, guess what? I get depressed when I don't have people to hang out with. Isn't that strange? And I'm an introvert, and there's a lot of introverted people that are listening to me right now that understand exactly what I'm telling you. That yes, you want to be alone, and you don't like the crowds, and you don't like the parties, and you don't like the spotlights, but still, you have a big fear about being alone, and you have certain people you still want to be around. And if you have family, you have a spouse, you have children, then even more so. I've never met one person, as we've quoted before, Stephen Covey, never met one person who on their deathbed said, I wish I had spent more time working on those projects. I wish I'd spent more time in the office. I wish I'd spent more of my weekends working. I've never met one person to ever tell me that. In fact, I want to challenge you. If you are a person that feels like that, then let me know, because I've never met one person that ever thought that. The fact is, we can let distractions become important. We can let the unimportant and urgent things become important things, and they're not. And they never are. They're always disguised as important things, And we can start doing these things because we have no boundaries. We have no margin. Remember, we said that a few weeks ago about imagining a piece of paper that has margins on it. And instead of writing inside the margins, which looks better to us from some psychological reason, just imagine filling that entire paper from edge to edge with writing, and it's noisy to us. It's aggravating to most of us. We don't like reading that. In fact, pick up any book right now. If you're around your room somewhere or in your house, just go grab a book and notice that every single book has margins in it. And notice something else, that if you go through some books that try to get cheap on you and they're reducing the size of the margins, notice how it doesn't look good to most people. Like I'm looking at this book right now. There's a book I picked up by Albert Ellis that I'm thinking about doing on this show called A Guide to Rational Living. And I'm thumbing through this book and it basically has no margins. The margins are like 3 centimeters on each side. They're not like really big. And I'll be honest with you, it's kind of aggravating to look at this book. I don't really like it at all. It's annoying me because there's no margins whatsoever in this book. Let me grab this book up here on my keyboard for just a second. This is a Logic book, and Logic is a computer program that lets you write music. And I'm looking through it, and it's got pretty small margins too, but it's more like 4 centimeters, and it's just more appeasing to me. It's got more white space. In fact, if you've ever taken any type of class in design, especially if you get into journalism and things like that, you will notice that there's a whole thing in there about white space. And too much white space is a problem, but you also learn that very little white space can be a problem as well. Men like space. Mankind likes space. And if we don't have boundaries in our lives, if we say, yes, I'm going to work hard, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to work on the weekend. I'm not going to answer my emails on Friday. I'm not going to be available by instant message all throughout the day. That's a good thing to do, because for most of us, our first things aren't answering instant messages. Our first things aren't answering emails. Those are distractors that keep us away from our first things. So it's a good thing to limit and make trade-offs and say no to things so you can say yes to other things. As Greg says, we can try to avoid the reality of trade-offs, but we cannot escape them. We can try to avoid the reality of trade-offs, but we cannot escape them. I've been involved in these planning sessions, which honestly I find a waste of time. I hate to say this. I think I've talked about it before in previous podcasts, but I've been in these meetings where people will get together and brainstorm for 2 or 3 days about what we need to do to go to the next level, what we need to do to fix things and to push us, past certain levels into greater areas of excellence. And the problem is twofold. One, there's always this thing of, okay, here's what we really need to do, and this is going to help us solve the problems. And then some egghead who's in charge of the meeting will come by and say, well, but listen, we need to do things that we can actually implement. And if you can't do this personally, because you're not the president of the corporation, then I need you to think about something you can do. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, but if I could do something that would change the company, I would. Fact is, I can't do this to make a change. I need money. I need higher ups to say yes to things, and then we'll actually get the ball rolling. So you give me some peddly little thing of saying, well, do this little bitty thing. It's going to magically change. I just find that stuff a waste of time and a waste of days that I could actually be doing other things. The other problem that comes from these types of meetings is how many times can we really narrow it down to 2 or 3 or 4 major projects that we should do? We come up instead with like 20 top priority projects, and we never can narrow it down to like the top 2. Here's the top 2 things we need to do and to focus on. That's simplicity. There is power in that type of simplicity, that simplistic summary of brainstorming. But no, instead we come away with 20 things that we're going to do, and it's so complex, we never can put it together. We never can make it a reality in our lives. Because again, we think we can do it all. That's the insanity of what we're talking about here, is this mindset that somehow we can do everything. We can do it all. We can just cram it all. So sure, we can come up with 20 top projects to do because it's all important. We can't do away with any of it. No, we've got to do all 20 of these things instead of saying, let's do these 2 things and let's master them and let's dominate in these 2 areas. No, instead we want to be all things to all people. And again, we end up being nothing to everyone. We cannot do everything. We can do anything, but we cannot do everything. Here's something else that Greg says. It's easy to see why it's so tempting to deny the reality of trade-offs. After all, by definition, a trade-off involves 2 things we want. Do you want more pay or more vacation time? Do you want to finish this next email or be on time to your meeting? Do you want it to be done faster or better? Obviously, when faced with a choice between 2 things we want, the preferred answer is yes to both. But as much as we'd like to, we simply cannot have it all. A non-essentialist approaches every trade-off by asking, how can I do both? Essentialists ask the tougher, but ultimately more liberating question. Which problem do I want? An essentialist makes trade-offs deliberately. She acts for herself rather than waiting to be acted upon. As economist Thomas Sowell wrote, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. I don't know if you've ever seen in economics classes or maybe as a program manager something called the project triangle. It's sometimes known as the iron triangle, sometimes known as the triple constraint triangle. Basically, think of a triangle. Triangle has three sides. And you can see this if you want to go to firstthingsproductivity.com/55 is episode 55. Down at the bottom, I'll have a picture of this triangle if you want to see it. But three sides of a triangle. And you can write money on one side, scope on the other side, and time on another side. So those are your three sides. And in the middle, you can draw a big circle and label that quality. Fact is, we want quality of things. And quality is going to be a simple equation. It's going to take time plus money plus scope. Scope being your vision of things. What is it that you're really going after type of thing. Now, engineers have known this for a very, very long time. The fact is that if you compromise on one of these things, it's going to affect the others. You can have it good, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, but you can't have all three. You're not going to ever find something. I mean, think of products in your life. When was the last time you found a good product that was very fast and was very cheap at the same time? Usually you have to pick two. If you want something really good and that's really fast, it's not going to be cheap. Think about carriers that deliver packages. If you want to pick a really good carrier that's not going to kick your packages or throw them at a door, and you want it to be there fast, it's not going to be very cheap. It's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, maybe you want something good, but you don't want it to cost a lot of money. Well, don't expect it to be very fast. And if you do want it to be very fast and very cheap at the same time, then you can't expect that it's going to be good. You're going to have two of these things, but you're not going to be able to have all three of these things. Now, this is a good paradigm to have as a program manager, but I think we can take this same type of thing and apply it to our lives in general. And we'll come back to this idea in just a minute as we're kind of wrapping up this show. But think of quality of life. So instead of a quality of product, think about your quality of life. And if you want an intense quality to your life, well, you've got three things that are going to help drive that. What does it cost you? And not maybe in terms of money, but how much of yourself do you have to devote to this? How much of your mental resources? How much thinking do you have to give to this type of thing? It's going to take some time, and it's going to take a certain scope in your life, a certain vision, a certain perspective of life. So if you want something that doesn't cost you a lot, again, not just in terms of money, but doesn't cost a lot in terms of your dedication, a certain amount of thinking through it and planning it. If you don't want it to cost you a lot of time, then you're probably going to have to decrease your scope of things. So think about writing a book. If that's your vision in life, you want to write a book, but you don't feel like you have enough time, or you're not willing to say no to things in your life to create time. If you're not going to let it cost you things in terms of really thinking through what it is you're wanting to write, no, you want to do it fast, you want to do it without a lot of cost to you, well, you're not going to probably write a very good book, and you may not write a very big book. So your scope is going to get smaller. Maybe now you write a 20-page book instead of a 200-page book because you just don't have the time. You're not saying no to things. You're not really giving of yourselves to this type of project to begin with. See, this is the thing of trade-offs. Now, let's say you want to write a 200-page book. That's without question. This is something I'm going to do. Well, now you've got two things that you're going to have to sacrifice one or two of these things. Either that's going to cost you something in terms of you planning, in terms of you working less and making less money so that you can feed more into your time. So you're sacrificing some of your costs and not sacrificing so much of your time. Well, if you sacrifice your time instead, well, instead of now it taking you a month to write that 200-page book, now it may take you 10 years to write that 200-page book. You see, you've got to decide what is your trade-off here. This is all part of the quality and the intensity to our life. I wish it was different. I wish you could have all three of those things. I wish that you could do everything, but the reality is that you cannot. So actually, I think this is very good news for us because, again, the ladder leaning on the wrong wall, that's a travesty. And what we're trying to do here is to not allow ourselves to put a ladder on the wall that says you can do everything, and then to wake up 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road and think, I haven't done anything of what I really wanted to do. I haven't really lived life yet because I've leaned that ladder on the wall that I can do everything. And when I lean my ladder on that wall, the non-essential, screaming, unimportant things are going to usually dominate your life. So instead of asking yourself, what do I have to give up? We should reframe that to what do I want to go big on? What do I want to emphasize? What is it that's the resonator for me? The non-essentialist thinks I can do everything. I can do both. How can I do it all? That's what they ask themselves. An essentialist says, what is the trade-off I want to make? What can I go big on instead? The non-essentialist thinks I can do everything. The essentialist says I can do anything, but not everything. Now, Greg ends with an example that is very similar to the triangle example that I used earlier. And this was a story from the New Yorker of a particular person going on a trip to Australia and hiking around and going through a class out there. And this female instructor was telling this person, he says, imagine a 4-burner stove. So you have a stove that has 4 burners on it. One burner represents your family. One burner is your friends. One burner is your health, and one burner is your work. Now, in order to be successful, you have to cut off one of your burners. And in order to be really successful, you have to cut off 2. Now, Greg says, of course, this was tongue-in-cheek. I'm not here to suggest that living the way of the essentialist requires us to decide between our families and our health and our work. What I am suggesting is that when faced with a decision where one option prioritizes family and another prioritizes friends, health, or work, we need to be prepared to ask, which problem do I want? Trade-offs are not something to be ignored. They are something to be embraced and made deliberately, strategically, and thoughtfully. So your homework for this week is to think about, what problems do I want? What adventures do I want to partake in? And what may be good to do is to take this 4-burner example and to make a 4-quadrant grid of your life and have 1 quadrant family, 1 quadrant friends, 1 quadrant health, 1 quadrant work, and to list out in each of those quadrants, what are the essential things for you in those and what are the non-essential things in each one of those areas? And possibly then even prioritize the areas themselves. So what is more important to you? Are your friends more important to you than your family? Is your health more important to you than your work? And then look at your last week's schedule. Pull it up if it's in a computer, or just write it down or think about it and think through, how much does your last week, your last 2 weeks, your last month, how much does it reflect the thing you just did? How much does it reflect your priorities and the essential things you've just identified in your life? Now, here's some good news. If it doesn't reflect it very good, that's okay, because that's what we're going to be spending the next few weeks really talking about. How can we get some congruency between what we think are essential and what we're really reflecting in our lives? These 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of this whole series, is to realign our thinking, to realize I do have a choice. I must choose. I must have dignity in my choice. I must realize that not everything is essential, and then I must choose and trade off things. I must say no to things. I must be willing to say no to things. I must realize that I can do anything but not everything. And if we can get our thinking aligned to those pillars, we can just start thinking that way a little bit. Yes, we're going to slip up here and there. We're not going to be perfect, but if we can just start getting our minds framed around that type of thinking, we're going to be much more likely to really embrace essentialism in our lives. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode today on trade-offs. As always, please consider leaving me a rating, comment on iTunes if you listen to me there. It just helps let other people know about the show. If you have any comments on this episode, feel free to leave them for me in my discussion area set up at firstthingsproductivity.com/55. Again, is in episode 55, and you can also reach out to me on Twitter and on Facebook as well. So until next time, remember this: you cannot do everything. You can do anything, but not everything. So what is it that really resonates with you? What is it that you really want to do? What is it that really matters to you? Think about that. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.